And yes, these aren't military aircraft, you know, 25, 30 pounds makes a huge difference. So, all right, I've bleeded enough, so are you ready?
Ready.
All right, thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
All right, before I start, to provoke some discussion afterward, I brought in some toys. I've got a PDA that runs XE Soar, beautiful, really works nice indoors, doesn't work the crap out in the sunlight. So I now got one that is fully sunlight readable. I took a Nook and kind of cracked the operating system, and I'm running it in Android with the XE Soar, and it's fully sunlight readable. So if you're interested in PDAs later, we can talk. Number two, I could not help, since I got an audience, you all probably know I'm building another airplane. And I'm stuck. I got to cut some 09 steel. I got to cut 4 flat sheet pieces out, and I don't have a metal cutting bandsaw. So if anybody knows where I can find access to a metal cutting bandsaw, come see me afterwards. All right, now I got to pay for my remarks. All right, so here's the deal. I talk to audiences all the time, and one of the things I hear almost every day is, "Sir, you're exactly right." You know, if I tell a joke, everybody laughs. When I talk, everybody shuts down and they pay attention. And you get kind of used to that. So I recognize this audience is going to be a little different. So here's what I would ask. If you have a question of fact or clarification of a point I made, please raise your hand and ask. If you have an opinion, an objection, or you want to wax eloquent, let's wait till the end, because I know there's going to be discussion. I want to have that discussion, but let me get through the whole pitch before we wander off into debating whether I'm right or I'm wrong. Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
You guys are definitely trainable. So here's the deal. I want to talk to you about something that I've grown up with in my military career called operational risk management. Now, risk is something we do by nature just as human beings every day. We don't think about it in those terms. And as aviators, trained as aviators, somebody has talked to us about risk and about managing risk. So what I'm going to talk to you about is not necessarily new to you. And what I don't want you to do is tune me out because you say, "Crap, I already do that. This is nothing new. I've heard this before." Because I think this is different unless you have flown in the military, and in the military within the past 10 years. This may be somewhat new to you. In soaring risk management is particularly important because we fly without a motor. We constantly make a decision: can I make it, or am I going to land out? Can I land out? Where do I land out? Flying final glides, training: am I going to make it? Do I just land short? Flying in gaggles, flying with large groups of sailplanes where you don't have the option to power up and get out of the way if you don't like where you are. So managing risk while we're flying is not a new concept. And that's really not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about getting hooked up, ready to launch. Are you really ready to go when it's time to go? And that's what operational risk management is about. So I come from a background I've been flying since I was 14. I got a license at 17. I flew hang gliders before that, so you may question my judgment already. But it's been tempered over the years, I would argue. About 4,700 hours military time. 700 of that is combat hours. And I'll tell you, operational risk management is no different in combat or in peacetime. And matter of fact, the record in the military is that peacetime training is actually more dangerous than combat. Combat, your senses are heightened. We're totally focused on risk versus reward. I would argue that our accident rate in combat is way lower than it is in training. This data will prove that out. In the 50s, these numbers, 19.6, that's 19.6 airplanes lost per 100,000 hours flown. That's how we normalize different fleets, and that's how I can compare an operation here at TSS with Air Force flying. I don't actually know the data for TSS 100,000 hours because you each keep your own time separately, but I think we could probably actually calculate our accident rate per 100,000 if we wanted to normalize that. But as you can see, back in the 50s, you expect losses in a big operation. That was kind of the operating theme. We started out where aviation was a science experiment and very rapidly grew to where it was a significant element in the battlefield and actually in our society in terms of transport and movement about. So in that rapid evolution, this concept of losses in a big operation kind of stuck with us for a while. And in the 50s, it was just kind of accepted. You were going to lose airplanes when you flew a lot. As airplanes got more expensive, people were always expensive, but I think we probably got a little bit more touchy-feely in our society and decided that maybe losing people at a high rate was probably not an acceptable way of doing business. But in either case, we have been trying to drive down the accident rate. You see, we've been relatively successful as we move through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's on a good vector, but I tell you, it gets really hard when you get out into these low numbers, squeezing that next margin of safety out. And it was in 90, FY 90, is when we introduced the concept of operational risk management. What we found was that the bulk of the accidents we were having stemmed from things that happened long before you got in the airplane. These accidents were out here in the high end. This is 1970, and back in the 50s would be up off the top of the chart, which is why I normalized the two. The bulk of the accidents back when we were having really high rates were driven by errors in flight, errors in judgment, mechanical failure, a variety of things. The bulk of our errors as we get into these low numbers are cumulative errors that wind up in stressors or circumstances beyond the aviator's ability to deal with it. So operational risk management is a process of weighing risk for gain. And as a matter of interest, we preach operational risk management from the beginning of your day to the end of your day. It's not just with flying airplanes. We preach it in the maintenance shops, we preach it in offices, we preach it in off-base activity. What we've tried to do is instill a culture of awareness of risk and assessment of risk for gain. Now we do mandate some things. You are not allowed to ride a motorcycle if you're on active duty unless you're wearing your PPE, whether personal protective equipment, whether you're on duty or off duty. And if you have an off-duty accident and are injured, you can be subject to disciplinary action if you weren't wearing your helmet, your gloves, your boots, and your mask, or your reflective vest. So, yeah, we have kind of regulated, we kind of driven people into that, but what it's instilled is a mentality of risk management. Now, as in any good military organization, we have a horrible regulation with terrible language that specifies all the ins and outs of how we do it, why we do it, the definitions and such, and you're free to go to this website and read it yourself if you like. But fundamentally, risk management is, ORM, operational risk management, is the management of accumulated risk and balancing that with what it is you're trying to gain for what it is you're risking. Now, we assess it in a variety of arenas. It's not just the flying itself. We assess the individual, we assess the mission and what you're going to do, we assess the equipment you're going to do it with. And as I said, any one little decision may or may not be a defining factor. But when you line up all the decisions you make, at a certain point, there's an accumulated risk there that you need to balance and understand. Now I want to talk specifically about how this relates to soaring. We have the 94th Flying Training Squadron at the Air Force Academy. We train about 1,000 cadets a year up through solo in gliders. Of that 1,000, about 100 to 150 continue on to go all the way up through CFIGs and get into the racing, or they get into aerobatics in their sailplanes. So it's 1,000 solos a year with another maybe 150, about 100 CFIGs and about another 50 who build hours and do cross-country, go out in cross-country races and do aerobatics. The interesting thing about the soaring operation at the Academy is 90%, actually 91% of the sorties are flown solely by Academy cadets. The instructor is a student in the Academy, and the student pilot is a freshman at an Academy, or a fourth degree at the Academy. And in that, it's been 9 years since they have had a Class A or Class B accident. And that's just, Class A is a destroyed airplane or a loss of life. Class B is an airplane that's damaged beyond repair. Class C, we can repair it. But no Class A's or Class B's in 9 years. 150,000 hours. I'm sorry, 150,000 sorties, 51,000 hours. No Class A accidents, no Class B accidents. The bulk of the things they have is hanger rash getting airplanes in and out, because they fly about 200 to 250 sorties a day at the Academy, about 220 days out of the year. It's a continuous operation. It's an extremely busy flight line. they'll routinely have 10 to 15 sailplanes airborne at any one time, and then another 4 or 5 that are just doing, up to pattern altitude and landing. Very disciplined pattern. They do have radios, but the bulk of the talking on the radio is the dispatcher talking to the tow planes. Glider pilots don't talk unless there's an emergency or they need priority in a pattern. So it's a very disciplined procedural pattern. I only say that because this risk management process is imbued into these kids right from the start, and then they'll go through their Air Force careers understanding how that applies to aviation. So what the heck am I talking about with operational risk management? Every day before you fly, one of the things you do in your pre-flight assessment is a risk management checklist. And it's basically assessing man, machine, and environment. Some of the questions are subjective, some of the questions are objective, yes, no, or quantitative. But fundamentally it is an effort to get the individual to look at the decisions he or she has made up to the point of strapping into the airplane and understanding how they accumulate risk or stress relative to what they're about to go do. We quantify it because we don't want to make it too difficult for them, but we want them to exercise judgment. We want that judgment to be quantifiable. So what happens is you basically score on a 1, 2, or 3 scale. Visibility clear day, scores a 0. Visibility is marginal 1, high, low vis is a 2. You accumulate scores all the way down. We assess the temperature, wet bulb temperature, density, altitude, microbursts. This is, again, tailored for operations at the Air Force Academy, which is in the lee of the Rockies, so they have some interesting weather patterns there. So they've tailored this checklist specifically for them. That's the interesting thing about how the Air Force has regulated ORM. The regulation is very specific about what you'll do, when you'll do, but not how you'll do it. It's left to the unit commander to build the ORM program for his or her unit. I fill out, every time I go fly my F-22, I fill out this sheet, and it is tailored specifically for operations in the F-22. When I flew it over in the Middle East here a couple weeks ago, I filled out an ORM sheet, but it was different there than for here. Because over there we had to deal with potential for Iranian activity and a lot of other things. So we tailor the ORM for the specifics of the location. So this is not necessarily a checklist that we would use here, but it's representative. So basically environment, this is the runway conditions, the environment, then getting into the man, and some of that was, the environment was also the airplane. Then the mission itself, what is it you're going to go do? You add up the score. If it falls within a certain range, the pilot in command is the deciding factor on whether the mission goes forward or not. And that's down here. You can see if from a 0 to 14 score, pilot in command is the approval authority. In that case, it would be the student instructor pilot, or if the student is going solo, it could potentially be just the student pilot. If he gets into the moderate range, he goes to the operations soup and says, hey, I'm in the moderate range. Here are the things that are driving me into that moderate range, and here's what we've done to mitigate the risk. Maybe it's been 3 weeks since my student's flown, and I haven't flown in a week. So we just did a standard, what we call a standard out, SEPD, standard valve procedures training, where we'll do a very measured process of talking about emergency procedures, basically a refresher. So if you're in this moderate risk range, the crew would say, oh shoot, I didn't realize between not quite getting enough sleep and it has been a while since I've flown and the weather's a little dicey, there's actually more risk here than I had thought about. What are we going to do about it? And then they would specifically address, are there things they can do to drive down the risk. Then they go to the op soup and say, here it is, here's why we think we're ready to go fly. Op soup gives them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If it gets up here in the high category, he's got to go to the ops officer or the commander. And that's only because you may have mitigated the risk, but because that is risk to that unit's health and welfare, commander gets a vote. Now, this happens a lot to us in combat missions. When we're filling out a risk management and we're going to go into a high threat arena where there's been a lot of combat activity, you're going to be into that end no matter what. The key is the OPSO or the commander will look at, are there other stressors short of driving you into the combat arena that will cause them to have question whether they ought to send you into it. Based on the needs of combat, you're probably going to go on the high risk mission, but he may not send you, he may send somebody else, may move you to a lower risk mission. So the point is, if there's moderate or high risk, somebody else gets a look at what you've done to mitigate risk and then says yay or nay on the idea. So why am I talking about this to you guys? Oops, I'm supposed to go that way. Soaring has got an appalling accident rate these days. Now I don't have it normalized to 100,000 flying hours. And one would say, hey, it's getting better. Well, we've already lost 9 people this year. And they're to accidents that never should have happened. And in looking at the forensics of the accident reports, there are numbers of elements of decisions made prior to takeoff that factor into those accident rates. These aren't caught in a microburst and knocked out of the sky. These aren't ran out of gas and couldn't dead stick it into someplace. These are accidents that rushed getting to the field. Left something out in the checklist because they're hurrying to make a takeoff window, or their lineup in the list, and took off without a control hooked up or something. There's a series of stressors that have added to these accidents, of which I think operational risk management as a philosophy might have given some pause an opportunity to break the chain of events. So my pitch to you all is that the nature of a club is we combine, partly because we like to fly together, but partly it has to do with shared resources. No one of us as individuals can afford an airfield and a tow plane and a tow pilot and all the things. So there's a lot of shared risk in coming together as a club. So when I make bad decisions and I put the club at risk by wrecking an airplane, wrecking a tow plane, or doing something, that's risk that all of you suffer. So as an organization, we can make a decision to say, we want to have a boat when the risk is beyond a certain level. One way to do that is to build our own ORM process. It is not nearly as onerous as you might think. I mean, it's a matter of when you go to sign up on the list for a tow, you fill out a one-page, 10 questions, 1, 2, or 3. Here's where I am on that. And if you find yourself in the moderate, you go, oh, I didn't realize that. Well, what do I need to do about that? Maybe it's just talk with an IP. Maybe it's take a pattern ride if you're up in the high end. Maybe it's take a ride with the IP around the pattern just to get kind of resynced to ops. But it's getting you calibrated to the fact that late all-nighter you pulled the night before, the car broke down on the way, and so you're behind getting to the line to get set up. You had planned a 300K today, you need to get off by 11, you're already now an hour late. Maybe you didn't bring a crew member with you for the tow, so there's a little extra pressure not to land out. There's a series of accumulators that once you break ground will all have an impact on your ability to be successful or not successful on your flight. The process, we're all good at managing risk, but we're pretty good at forgetting about some of the decisions we make through the course of the day prior to getting us to the flight line. And all this ORM process does is kind of remind you of all those decisions and causes you to factor them into the mission you're about to go fly. And then if we are all going to share some higher level risk than what we all determined is reasonable, then somebody else gets a vote. Just say, OPSUIT, I'm in the moderate range, I haven't flown for 3 weeks. I just did an hour ground eval with one of the IPs and feel like I'm ready to go. Or if it's really high, then maybe you talk to one of the club board members and say, here's what I'm going to do, here's why I'm going to do it, here's what I've done to mitigate the risk, I'd like to go do this. Now what we're accepting is that either the OPSUIT or the board member might say, not so sure that's a good idea. How about you do this, or let's talk about this before you make this decision to go do it. We're surrendering some freedoms, but it is for the collective good. I'm not a socialist, but it's the nature of a combined organization of shared risk. So that's my pitch. That's what operational risk management. I think if we decided this was something useful, I would build a simple, 10, no more than 10 element checklist that would be right there at the ops counter as you're signing in, and you fill it out and you sign your name in and the number out to the side of what your number is. It's still on you. You can put whatever numbers down you want. I mean, you can lie to the OPSUIT and say I'm a 0 if you want. But really, this is an opportunity to remind you of the decisions that got you to this point and get you to say, just think about what you're going to do and make sure that the risk that you're looking for, or the risk that you're accepting, is worth what you're hoping to gain out of it. And maybe you'll moderate the task. You know, so I show up here. I'm going to do it. Let me just close with an example. I get out here. It's back in mid-July. My ability to get out here and fly is pretty episodic. I'm lucky if I can get out here. I get my tow duty once a month. I'm lucky if I can get out here maybe 1 or 2 other weekends a month. And they're pretty well hardwired scheduled on my calendar. It's going to be that Saturday of that part of the month, and I better hope it's sunny that day or I'm screwed. I've come out here and just done pattern rise because that was my day to fly, and that was it. So I'm out here. It was hotter than Hades. It was 90s, mid-90s and humid. I got out here late because I got some calls that kept me there at the office banging out things on a Saturday morning. But I got out here. I got here a little late. Everybody else is already assembled, ready to go, so I'm hurrying to get going. I get out to the end of the line. I get my airplane up there, and they hook the tow rope up, and it falls off. They hook it up, it falls off. Damn, it's a home built, and my tow hook has got I designed the tow release, and one of the catch that holds the ring on for a back release had backed off on it. So I had to unhook from the tow line, come back over, and get the and work on it. It took me about 20 minutes to get it fixed. I'm now about an hour late from the takeoff I want to make. Oh, by the way, I had promised my wife I'd take her to church at 6 o'clock. That means I had to be on the ground by 3:30, in the box by 4, because it takes me that long to get back, get cleaned up, and get her to church. So I am rapidly running into about an hour-long flight if I can do it. But the day looks good. It's worth it. So I'm getting ready to push it back out there, and I don't remember who. I think it was Ed. Bless you, Ed. Somebody said, "Have you done a positive?" Oh, damn it! No, I haven't. Here, grab that. We do a positive, and guess what? When I put the right spoiler up, it stayed up. Up, down. Spoiler stayed up. At that point in my positive, a little belt crank in the back that had been working its way loose had popped free. So it saved my butt. Now I'm pretty certain I could have landed the airplane with the spoiler up, but I might not have necessarily landed here at the field, which would have been really ugly. Because I put a lot of work into that home built, and the last thing I want to do is land it in the trees or land it somewhere else. But the point is, I had built a bunch of things moving me along, getting me anxious to go, and I had dropped something out of my cross check, and fortunately someone reminded me, and that's what that ORM checklist is designed to do, is remind you of the decisions you made up to that point, make sure you understand fully where you are at that point, and say, I'm ready to go forward. And if I'm not ready to go forward, what can I do to make myself ready? So, with that, feel free, open up. Matt.
Gotta say something first. I think the checklist that you're talking about is excellent. Most European clubs have it. They always have it. The only problem I see in this club, I'm not creating a culture to accept that, because we have the problem that we cannot enforce our own rules.
Well,
That, I think, as you create the list or the checklist, we need to do that.
well, the enforcement of the rules, Matt, is we all asked to join the club. The club says, okay, yeah, here's the club bylaws. I mean, if someone blows off the bylaws, at some point the board's going to have to do something about. First of all, we all have to accept this as a process. It's a little tough. Once you've already agreed to join a club, then it changes its rules. You go, wait a minute, that's not what I signed up for. So I mean, this is not necessarily management by fiat. But, and as I said, the individual can lie on the sheet. This is as much about a process to force you to think your way up to, review, make sure you're ready to go, as it is about the club enforcing a set of rules. That's what I'll tell you. The honest value about ORM is, as I'm going through the day and making decisions, I'm now thinking, crap, that's going to affect flying. Maybe I'll just, instead of that 300K, maybe I'm just going to fly locally. Because I'm getting stressed just to get to the airport. I get there, I'm late, screw it. Maybe I'll leave it in the box. I'll just fly the club airplane. It basically builds a mental process where you start thinking about decisions that you might have made 3 hours ago, but will have an impact on whether you go fly or not. Go ahead.
I would suggest to enhance that list. It might take several years. We went through this in the competition soaring, where the rules were in the 80s few pages, now they're like
Very
200.
thick.
The enforcement came with the idea of taking points of them,
Right.
performance. And in a club, maybe we could do that, finding people. That's what the Germans do in their club.
Yeah.
And it works pretty good.
Well,
But
I-
also education, we need to do more of these things.
I don't disagree with you, but I think we're talking about two separate elements of the equation. It's relatively low threat to say, hey, we're gonna put this in place, everybody fills a sheet out. Then it's a whole nother, whether it's say we're gonna put some draconian measures in to enforce this. That's, quite honestly, given the personality of this club, I'm not sure we'd make it past that hurdle. I recognize that for some folks that seems like a logical step, but given the type of people that gravitate to aviation, which are type A's or individual decision makers and such, not necessarily ready to sign up for an organization that's going to tell them how to do what they think they're already fully capable of doing. So I personally think we would make some money in terms that we would build some advantage for the club just by trying to build a process that instills a mindset of risk management. I got to tell you, in the 35 years of flying, I started flying gliders about a year after pilot training, so it's about 33 of those years I've been flying sailplanes. And I've flown in a lot of different clubs around the country. This is one of my absolute favorites because I love the personality of this club and such, but I got to tell you, this is one of the looser operations that I've flown with. Some of it's the personality, some of it's the facility. We have a very tight little operations area, and we tend to queue airplanes up right in the landing zone. I mean, there's some things that drive us into a tough spot. I think that requires that we be very disciplined about how we conduct our operation here. We're not as disciplined as I would like to see, but I've grown up in a pretty disciplined, draconian, some would call draconian culture. So I may be used to more tighter bounds than you all are. But in any case, I think we have room for improvement. This is one way to do it. I'd offer it as a concept.
Another advantage of the concept is really just to slow down. I mean, you heard about my little tow rope incident, and most of that was all due to not doing this before my second takeoff. I do it all the time before I go fly as well, but I queued my airplane up for the second launch of the day. Thought I had time, was going to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, take a break, and instead, Buzz goes, hey, let's go. I've got, Wally here, we're ready to tell you. But okay, so I rushed, jumped in the airplane, never considered all the changes. Having taken a little bit more time to go, okay, before we go, let's review this, would have made all the difference. Because I really shouldn't have taken that tow. That was everything about that ride was really just not taking the tow. Everything that happened afterwards was a result of that decision. So, I mean, it's a good step to slow down, even before, your second, third, even your first flight, to slow down and say, okay, let me make sure I'm good with everything that's going on here before I go fly.
There's a hand over here, too. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Kind of, not ORM, but kind of your statistics about gliders and the accident rate.
Yeah, which one?
The accident
This
rate
one?
seems to be, relatively horizontal.
The problem with this is it's not normalized to the number of flights. So, if we're flying the 3 times as many sorties back here, then you're right, we actually would be better. That's why you normalize it to 100,000 hours. This is a Soaring Society of America chart I pulled out of one of their safety briefings, so I don't have that normalized like that.
All right. Now, if it's an horizontal line, does that tell us that soaring is inherently dangerous?
Well, I think that's that mindset of, well, you got to expect losses in a big operation. Soaring is inherently dangerous, but I don't believe it is, because if you go look at the accidents that happen, they're not because of things that were totally outside the control of the pilot was unable to defeat. So when I lose a military airplane, we have a board that spends 30 days. We pick apart the wreckage down to the nuts and bolts and to see where the needles were deflected. And nowadays it's digital, so you can't deflect it. But no kidding, we do the CSI-like forensics on the airplane to understand exactly what happened, because every accident is a series of linked events that result in, and if you could break that link, if anywhere in there we had that opportunity to break the link, then the next time these links start lining up, maybe we'll stop it. When we do the forensics on soaring accidents, we find that more often than not, it's not something that's beyond the, outside the kind of the purview of the aviator to deal with. I'll have accidents like the Raptor I just lost a couple weeks ago down in Florida. Has a relatively routine electrical problem out in the airspace, shuts the generators out, starts coming home, things start compounding, winds up on final, the airplane pitches down, it's trailing smoke, he says that's it, and he's out. Now I'm waiting for the final results to understand exactly what happened, to make sure he did all the things he should have done and it was beyond his control. But sometimes crap happens, fecal matter occurs. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at soaring accidents, it's very rare that you find one where it's just something that the pilot was not going to be able to deal with. Usually it's a result of either ops decisions, factors that weighed into the mission more often than not, or the process of getting out to fly. And that's why I think I would not accept that 9 deaths this year thus far is just the cost of doing business.
Well, the safety record of the Air Force Academy soaring operation kind of backs up those words.
That's why I use the example. It's youngsters flying in a disciplined process at a very high rate with pretty decent results. Maria?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's definitely not horizontal, because in one way you can tell, you can sort of extrapolate that. If you go back to, where does that start, 1981?
1981, yeah.
Yeah, go back and look at on the Soaring Society of American website at the magazine archives, look at the front page that says the membership, which isn't necessarily indicative of the number of soaring pilots in the country, but it gives an idea of the trend, and you can see how it just dropped from that time.
Really?
So we've got about the same number of accidents with less pilots flying.
We actually have the data, I believe. I mean, our op soup every day logs the length of a sortie and the number of sorties. So we could build a rate per 100,000 for our own club. I'm not sure across the entire soaring community in America we could do the same thing.
You can't do it for GA, it just doesn't,
Yeah.
no one knows you how.
And that's what, as a matter of fact, just what I was going to tell you, was back about, I think it was about 97, SSF turned around and said we can't accurately track the number of hours flown because they were counting on clubs, they were counting on organizations. And then when Glide Rides America popped in.
It's easier to tally up accidents per event, per
Correct.
mission, per sortie.
Yes.
So that is a capturable number.
And that's-
But it's not necessarily a good gauge of.
Right.
Although, I didn't bring the statistic, but in this same briefing, it's on the Soaring Society of America's website under it's under soaringsafety.org. Under their presentations, there's a 2012 SSA a briefing at the 2012 about out of Reno, and this chart was pulled from there. The chart just before this broke it out by where the accidents were relative to the mission. Was it ground ops, takeoff, air in-flight, landing? If you look where they all occur, they occur in takeoff and landing. That's where they are.
That's where all aviation.
That's aviation.
But
You're close to the ground.
that's by definition, if you're going to have an accident, you're close to the ground.
Or soon will.
Eventually.
That's why it's misleading.
How'd you I have a poster on the bulletin board that I hope people have at least glanced at. We stole it from the British Gliding Association, but it's a very rudimentary risk management tool that you've been talking about. It asks how many flights have you had, how recent were the flights, and what are the weather conditions. And it's a little paragraph that you draw the lines, and it tells you whether you're low risk, medium risk, or high risk.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing, and what you want is more elaborate, but people should at least look at these things and think of these things.
The more elaborate is, for me, it's, and because military aviation tends, especially fighter aviation, tends to put you at kind of the limits of the human capacity. There are many decisions I make during the course of a day prior to a mission that have nothing to do with flying, but have everything to do with my survivability up in the air. So that's why we focus so much on the human as part of it. But quite honestly, you come out here on a hot summer day and going to fly a long, and you're planning on a long sortie, how well you are when you take off is relevant. The dehydration and the effects of poor nutrition on you at your decision making at the end of a 2 or 3 hour sortie really does have an impact on your success or not. And so that's why I still think it's relevant to what we do. It may not be if you're going to fly a local sortie. That's why a local sortie puts you in a low risk category, or it may put you in a low risk category.
Sir, I just took the FAA flight instructor refresher course. One of the, they have a risk management section there that's pretty, I thought it was pretty well done, that they're asking every organization that gives this course out to put out. One of the biggest things that caught my eye, you know, having been in the same type of background that you and I live in the type of risk management, the FAA's risk management, portrayal of accidents was 85 to 90% of the reasons that general aviation pilots or general aviation has accidents is personal decision making, and it's very well documented. Now, this is powered aircraft data, but it doesn't differentiate. You know, we're in the same category here. We're general aviation, and we're making these decisions that are independently. You know, nobody really has to hammer other than yourself to decide how safe or not you are to make these decisions. And in general, you know, the FAA says it is more dangerous to, than driving on the highway to fly a general aviation aircraft because of the type of decision making that people do. And that same decision making applies over here, and I've seen it a couple times. You know, when I'm towing folks or the decision to tow in conditions that are, that are just adverse and not taking those conditions into effect, just making just suppositions because the guy towing me says it's good to go, I'm going to go. So I think it's, that risk management checklist, even though it's not something that that it's probably, nobody's going to have the hammer over filling that out. Nobody's going to, check you on your validity of whether you're lying or not on that checklist. But when I read the risk management checklist before I fly, I look at everything that I've done and I'm doing it for myself and going, how much risk am I adding into my life by doing this, and what can I do or can I not do? So that checklist works very well. I think it's a good tool for everybody to check yourself before you go fly.
I would shy away from Matt's concept of some type of enforcement rules.
Not right away.
Well, if we find out that people we continue to have accidents and people are making decisions that weren't, that were opposite of what they said they were when they did their ORM, then we'd have a different decision to make. But as I said, my first thought is that it is just a process to help you do what we kind of say we already do, but I would venture to say you don't go all the way back to yesterday. What did I do yesterday that's going to affect this flight today? And the process is really just a mental checklist to say, all right, there's really nothing that's weighing on my ability to execute this mission today. Go off and go do it. It's for you. It's for you, but if you do it, we all benefit from it. And that's why as an organization, I think we would have to collectively agree that the concept of requiring that everybody do this mental process is valid. Whether or not we want to be enforcing it somehow, I think I would make that a separate decision.
I just want to add to this, really to attack this issue in GA. Of course, AOP has been many years spearheading this. There are 3 levels. One is first that check, that every individual has to make his own checklist, and also the operational safety losses that need to have a metric to make sure that the rules, club rules, FAA rules, whatever are complied with. And the next step is, of course, somehow you're going to enforce it, but because people are forgetful or sometimes dishonest or they're lying to themselves. And the most, and I think that's something that should be done prior to that, is education. We can gain and reduce a lot of that risk by having more educational sessions like this. And I really suggest that over winter time, maybe we should have 2 or 3 of these things to improve the culture of safety. By doing the education, having a metric, And then, of course, it is through collective enforcing or leadership enforcing. Somehow we have to have ways of regulate. Once we have the regulation, that has to be in place and has to be enforced.
I guess the point I want to make is, when ORM first came out, it was painful as it could be. It was too point driven, it was too rule driven, and then people realized, okay, this isn't working. But the culture of just thinking about it, the self-assessment, and I think that's where it needs to pretty much stay here. You make
Which
this,
is really why I pushed back on Matt on enforcement.
Right.
Because what we were trying to do was legislate risk management.
and common sense, and you can't legislate common sense. The other problem you have in an organization like this is, well, who are the decision-making authority? Is, am I, with extensive experience flying in the military and in the civilian world, going to have a board member who has 200 hours tell me I can't go flying? And he's not, and they're not even an instructor. Are they really qualified to make that decision? So you have that issue in this kind of organization is, who's qualified to make those decisions? If you're complying with the club rules, you're not breaking the FARs, and I want to go fly my personal glider, but I have X number of points, that's the pilot and command's decision.
Yeah.
As long as they're not breaking the rule.
Except, so you decide, I haven't flown in a couple months, and you accept a bunch of risks to say, well, hell, I'm still within all regs, I can go fly. You wreck your airplane, and because of that accident, this club gets shut down. That does affect me.
Right.
So I do think the club does have a vote.
Because of the tug. Only,
Well, the fact you wreck your glider a mile from here and kill somebody because of a traffic, they have a traffic accident. You think the county's not going to come after us and say, you people are dangerous, you're doing an activity that is a risk to the community. You change the nature of our operating environment.
but once again, who's going to make the decision?
I don't argue that part.
If
But
you
what I'm
haven't
saying
flown in
is,
3 weeks,
the fact that you as a pilot in command have the sole right to make the decision to fly or not to fly is perfectly okay when you're operating off an FBO and it's just you. The FBO actually has rules. But when you're flying here in a club where we all accept a shared level of risk for operations, I do believe we do have a vote. Now do I get to tell you, no, you can't fly? No. But I think maybe if we collectively agree, I do get to tell you that at least think your way through and say you're ready to go. And if you're beyond a certain point, at least we'll add out for the opposite what you've done to reduce the risk.
right.
It's just asking or requiring that everybody do that mental process and allay the risk if it's excessive.
It's management.
In
Risk
the end, I'm not
management.
going to tell you can't go fly. Boom. Bert. Boom.
On this shared level of risk, y'all will all be pleased to know that you won't have to be bothered so much with my shared level. I joined this club.
So we'd have had a special category in man side. Bird would have been about a 9. So, am I healthy? Am I bird? 9. We can take care of that.
Paul Lynch
No
taught
problem.
me how to fly. I never flew until I was 67 years old, and I don't recognize it today, and most of the women are stunned that like me a lot, that I'm going on 82 years of age, and I have had to come to a very difficult decision that I almost cried when this guy towed my plane away from here on October the 15th. I sold it to him, and by the way, he called me from New Hampshire and he said, Mr. Seville, I want to buy that plane. And before I could say anything, he said, I'm sending you $1,000. And he said, if I don't pick the plane up in 30 days, you can keep the $1,000. And I wanted to say, so real loud, no, this is too early in the deal. I said, well, and he said, now, what about the price? I said, I don't think we want to go there. He said, that's fine. He paid my price. But the point I want to make is that I have 846 takeoffs and landings here. I never flew in my life until I flew with Paul Lynch. And they've been successful. But it's a very, very difficult situation for me to decide to stop flying my plane solo. I can still fly in the Whiskey 6 with an experienced pilot. CB and I were up the other day, and he was in the back, and I felt very comfortable with him. But he could take over in a minute. I flew not too long ago, and the guy said, maybe 2 months, "You're too slow on flying. Let me have it." And the damn tow plane is coming straight at me. Well, I didn't feel like a tow plane was coming straight at me on landing. But at 80, going on 82, I think it's time for me to fly with an instructor or an experienced pilot. And so I'm removing a big risk from all you guys. You all are all send me a few dollars and get it out of the air.
It was a courageous decision. I applaud you for it. And I know the day will come when I will get there. I'm not looking forward to it. Yes, ma'am, Frank.
Matt and I grew up in the same club actually, and we saw that overregulation leads to more accidents because people didn't make their own decision when things changed while they were in the air. We had so many accidents in the landing phase because they're stuck exactly to the rule. You enter the pattern here, you turn it to crosswind here, and you come in. They never adjusted for wind.
When you regulate to the point that people stop thinking because they think, I've met this one, I'm good, and they didn't think their way through and go, well, I don't care what it says, I'm not good because of this. That, you don't want to get there. And that's why I think you never take it away from the pilot commander to make the decision to go or not to go. But because your decision of accepting a ton of risk impacts me, I ought to get a vote. And say, hey,
Who's determining that's the issue?
well, then that's the numbers.
Devil's in the details.
You know, the numbers on the chart says, you know, at this level of accumulated risk, you say to the soup, hey, I'm in the moderate category, but I've done this and this to mitigate the risk, and I'm good to go. And off you go.
Is there any data at the Air Force Academy before they were doing ORM to demonstrate the effect of that?
I believe there is, yeah, but because I was making a point, I did not bring that data.
Because you got like a kind of a unique operation, right? Fairly young people developing quickly, which is slightly different than what we have. Perhaps not. I mean, perhaps it's
Well, the average age was up in
You make a good point. This is a different operation. Our training is much more spaced out. You know, people don't get out here 5 times during the week to fly. The training there is much more concentrated and intense. But I mean, that brings a risk in and of itself. Our operations aren't nearly as dense. If we have 5, 6 airplanes in the air at one time, that's a huge-out day.
I think part of those 9 years, they had a bad
They
stretch
did.
there. Those motor gliders?
Well, they had a particular problem. They bought an airplane that really should not have been operated at a 7,000-foot field elevation, and then the morons went up to 20,000 feet and would do spin training. And the airplane had been tested at sea level, so they were doing the spinning at 10,000 feet, where it has reasonable spin entry and exit. Doesn't spin so well at 20,000 feet. And so they wrecked airplanes, killed people, and basically grounded an entire fleet of airplanes, thinking the airplanes were bad when in fact it was bad choice fly.
So how did the ORM, I guess the follow-up question is, how does ORM apply to known accidents and how tightly does it correlate?
Well, I would go back to,
There's actually two big drops. The first big drop is when the Air Force and the Navy came out with NATOPS and -10s
right,
for you guys.
down in here.
That was the big cliff. And then the next big cliff